Thank you so much. Mr. Cabinet Secretary, it's an honor to have you here. Distinguished members of the government of Kenya, distinguished members of AmCham, thank you for putting this on. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure for me to be here today, and it is always a challenge, though, to get up and speak after you're following a very eloquent speaker, and I am going to take up the challenge that the Cabinet Secretary made, in a sense, by, I'm also not going to deliver my formal prepared remarks, which I think actually shows what the speaker actually thinks about and how the speaker actually thinks. So you know this is coming from me, and I'm not just reading the notes that my staff has prepared. So, it's actually quite helpful sometimes just to say, like, that's it, right? And not that it's not correct, but I just want to speak from the heart, because I think this is such an important subject. And again, one of the dangers of speaking after an eloquent speaker is that he made all this. You don't want to follow somebody and you want to say exactly the opposite, right? But it's really almost eerie when somebody makes exactly every single point that you were going to make. So you're going to be hearing a lot of the same things, which I think is actually a very reassuring sign that we're all viewing this through the same lens. And I think what's so important here is, first of all, that we're even having this conversation, that we're talking about economic diplomacy and commercial diplomacy and development. These are real things. And I think for a long time in the foreign policy world, and I think about this a lot as the Deputy Secretary of State, we've kind of just talked about abstractions and I think the reality always has a way of coming back and biting you if you're not attentive to reality. Maybe you can get away for a while, but ultimately the world is driven by things that are real. You're talking about creating wealth. That ultimately comes from things that are real. And the wealth of the earth is probably the most primal source of wealth there is. And I think it is important for the United States to make sure that we are providing wealth for our citizens, as the Cabinet Secretary said. That is really the role of any government. So when we talk about an America First foreign policy, as President Trump has articulated, what we really mean by that is a foreign policy that makes our country more safe, more secure, and more prosperous. In other words, we need to be able to show our people that we're making their lives better through the policies of our government, including our foreign policy. That's the people that elected us, and that is the people to whom we are accountable. The same thing goes for Kenya. And so America First is a natural thing. It doesn't mean it's nothing against any other country, but you expect every country to put its own people first. And so I think it's this kind of reality-based conversations that really advance the ball, because it's easy in these diplomatic settings to talk about abstractions, but I think I like dealing with somebody who just puts their cards on the table and saying, look, I'm here to advance my country's interests, to make my country more prosperous, for me to be able to go back to my people and say, I have a good deal for you. You should be able to go back to your people and say that I have a good deal for you. That's the best kind of person you want to deal with, right? I don't want to deal with somebody who, maybe putting their own personal interests first and is depositing all the money in a Swiss bank account. That is not a stable situation for the long run. I don't want to encourage my companies to invest in that kind of a place where, who knows what's going on the other side. I mean, ultimately, a good deal is one that is fair to both sides, and where each side understands that they're getting great value for the deal and can explain that to their people. And it makes me very happy that you're talking about beneficiation, because I'm talking about beneficiation, and that's what we should be talking about, right? And everybody in this room is here for a reason, right? You're thinking about, benefiting whatever your constituency is, whether it is a company, a government, some interest group, right? And that's normal. Let's just be honest about that. There's nothing wrong with that. I just believe that honesty is the best policy, and you don't have to play games and pretend everything is for some higher calling, because ultimately, when you move to benefit your people, that's what makes the world move, and that's what makes countries develop. And then you can show your people, okay, there's prosperity, your standard of living is going up. This wealth unlocks other possibilities, and you're in a virtuous cycle. So again, I think we're talking about exactly the right things, and it just makes me very happy to be dealing with counterparts who are speaking the same language, and that's when you can actually cut a deal. I was ambassador to Mexico, U.S. ambassador to Mexico during the first Trump administration. They have a very long mining history in Mexico, but I think traditionally the governments there, or whoever has been able to grant the mining concession, has never really bothered to explain to the people in the local communities how the mining was going to benefit them. And so therefore, as a result, you often have strikes in the mining areas. You have very tense relationship, because I think a lot of the people feel that they are being exploited and that the wealth is not being shared. Maybe the wealth that comes from that community all goes to the capital city and they never see it. Maybe going to somebody's Swiss bank account. And that's not a great situation for the mining company that has to be dealing with the people who are very angry and feel that they have been ignored or disrespected. So again, I welcome the kind of transparency and openness that working in a democracy like Kenya really has. And sometimes, we are both blessed and cursed by the rule of law. The rule of law is what allows all of this to happen. The certainty you need for investments and for business to flow. It can also be very frustrating, and I think you have to strike the right balance, that courts don't become just instruments of obstruction, but we share the same common legal tradition, which is so important. And I think it's appropriate that things be done correctly, and that everybody know that if things are done incorrectly, they can be held accountable for that. And so, again, I feel like when we're talking about this with Kenya, there's just a sense that we understand what each of us is talking about, because we have the same constraints. I think constraints are fine. I think the danger in life is when people feel they don't have constraints and they can do anything they want. I think it's always striking the right balance, allowing there to be energy that moves society forward and advances, but also the constraints that just make sure that is not done in a completely arbitrary and capricious way. And you don't want to go too hard on the complete unbridled energy, but you don't want to go too hard on the limitations either, to kind of have Gulliver, who is held down and captured by the Lilliputians, and you never advance because you're spending all your time squabbling in court. So anyway, these are just I think important issues that set the background for what we're doing here. We're looking for ways, and I think fortunately they are very evident to come to a win-win solution, as the cabinet secretary said. I mean, ultimately, I try to define diplomacy. I meet our young diplomats. Okay, as a deputy secretary, I just spoke a few weeks ago to our whole new class of young diplomats. A lot of these folks are just out of college and they've just joined the Foreign Service. And I said, look, what is diplomacy really about? Sometimes I think, I don't know what their professors are teaching them in college, because they come with some strange ideas. But I said, it's about knowing what your interests are and what your agenda is. If you don't understand what you are looking for, then you're never going to be any good at your job, right? It's very important that you know that, and it's my job, I tell them, as the political leadership of the Department of State, to make sure you know what your interests are. I have to make sure that we're all on the same page. But then, you also have to have the empathy and the understanding to understand what your counterpart's interests are, right? Because your counterpart is going to be wanting to advance their interests. And it's all about, if your interests are this circle and your counterpart's interests are this circle, it's all about finding the overlapping space, the Venn diagram that is the win-win territory where your interests converge. It seems so obvious to me that with respect to critical minerals in Kenya, that's a very big space, and anyway, I'm delighted that we're having this conversation. I'm delighted that all of you in this room understand that, it seems to me. Supply chains. I mean, I don't think anybody ever talked about supply chains until the pandemic about 5 years ago. It's just one of those things everybody took for granted until they couldn't anymore, right? And I think now it's becoming clear that a country's interests depend largely on making sure you have a reliable supply chain, because things can break down pretty quickly, as we saw then. And for Kenya, I think the interest is in economic development for its people and growing its own infrastructure. It's a country with a lot of potential, and it wants to make sure that its potential is developed. Again, I don't need to tell you what your interests are, but it seems, again, somewhat obvious that you want to bring wealth and investment into your country that then creates other opportunities for your people. You want to maximize the portion of the value chain that remains in this country, so it's not completely extractive, and that gives jobs and that ultimately creates wealth, because jobs are part of the wealth, and the wealth has to benefit all the people. So again, I feel like everything I've said, and I'm sorry if this is super boring, because it's exactly what the cabinet secretary said beforehand, but that should give you, those of you who are potential investors, some degree of confidence, right, that we are at least talking the same talk. And again, we can always work out, sometimes you have tough negotiations. I mean, our president wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, right? And so that's really what this is about. And I think you can always find a spot that benefits both sides. If a deal is not fair, that is not going to be a deal that lasts in the long run. It's like a marriage, you can't trick somebody into marrying you, because if you tried to pretend to be something, they're going to find out before too long, right? And that's not going to be, before you know it, you're going to be seeing the marriage counselor. I just feel like in this, everything has lined up so well. And it's one of the reasons why it gives me such real joy and satisfaction to be here in Kenya. Because I think you all are very clear what you are looking for out of this. We share the same values, we speak the same language, literally and really figuratively as well. And so I think that there are just amazing potential to be gained from this discussion, and then frankly from further on discussions down the road. But this is a wonderful starting point, and honestly I think this is one of the most exciting conferences I've been to as Deputy Secretary, because it is just so very clear that we're at the very door of a real golden age here. And I think it's a golden age that will see both our countries benefit massively, and I am very proud to be part of that. And I think all of us in this room can feel like we are here at a point in time when history is being made. We'll look back and say, wow, people weren't, as the cabinet secretary said, people weren't even talking about some of these issues just a few years ago. This is all relatively, this focus is relatively new. And I think this is going to be probably a watershed moment in the history of this region when people look back. I mean, how did countries like, Singapore, Korea, those were countries that were very underdeveloped in the very recent past, in the course of my lifetime. And starting these kind of projects can lead to massive exponential improvements, and Kenya already is primed for that with all the benefits here. So I am super excited to be go on this journey with all of you. Because I was here today, I'm going to be feeling like I have my own little stake in the success of this. So again, I just want to thank the Cabinet Secretary for his very candid and realistic approach. Thank all of you for participating in this conference, and saying I look forward to watching your success, and hopefully in some way, if I can be a part of it, I want to be a part of it too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.